Hey everyone, Jeff here. Hey, wanted to take a second to follow up on that article I just posted and lay out the different avenues that one can take to get product to market and how all that plays into the various tariff scenarios that we're looking at in front of us in this coming year. So what we did here, basically just made up a quick Google sheet that laid out market pricing ex seller for all the major wine categories, whether you're talking about Austrian Gruner, Bordeaux Superior, Sancerre Blanc, and so on. And then looked at what I like to call it the padlock of channel options that we have as wine merchants. Knowing how to use this padlock to the advantage of everybody involved, so everybody wins, is really what makes a good wine merchant great. And it's what we're really passionate about doing, is finding just the most efficient, the most creative solution for anybody we're dealing with. Why a padlock? Well, like a padlock, there's basically these different number columns or different channel columns that you can flip, and you can come up with really hundreds of different combinations of how you get wine from a winery to the end consumer. We simplify it in this post, in this spreadsheet. There's really, there would still be hundreds of options here, but I limit it to just a number of columns here. We don't go crazy. So we're simplifying things a bit, but to be brief as I can, you have three things to look at: your importation model, your distribution model, and your retail model. For importation model, I'm just laying out the two basic models here. You have the indirect importation model. That's kind of the old school American model where you have a standalone importer. The importer brings in wine, marks it up 30%, stores it at their own site or a shared facility, and then resells it to a distributor, who then, of course, will resell it to retailers or restaurants. That's what I talked about in the article as being kind of the less efficient option, but it's still the way that the majority of our industry runs. We certainly participate in this to a certain extent too. It is what it is, but that's what you see. That's what you see with most of the big brands, and we'll get into that in a second. The second importation model, kind of the other one that you'll see most, is what I like to call the direct model. That's most common on the coast and major cities. That's where you have a distributor who's big enough to be able to buy wine from wineries DI or direct. And generally there'll be less margin involved. The infrastructure is all there. The fixed costs are all there because these distributors have infrastructure. So really it's only going to cost them, say, 5% extra to bring in wine direct. So you add a 5% margin there instead of a 30% margin. We're not talking about distribution margin yet, and there's clearly an efficiency advantage there. So those are the two importation models we're going to look at when we analyze, how a bottle of wine would fare in these different tariff situations. Next on our padlock is the distribution model. So I like to look at this really in three ways: conventional, compressed, and ultra compressed. So to start out, we'll look at conventional distribution. That's most of what you see on the street when you think about wine distribution. That's what you think about. That's where you have sales reps out on the street showing wines out of their bag to accounts. Accounts are placing orders, usually 1, 2, 3 cases at a time, and margins usually end up at about 30%. Distributors like to try to get 35%, but in real life, 30% is kind of what's expected and what's the norm. And that's really what it takes. If you're a distributor running these 2, 3, 4, 5 case loads all the time with reps, 30% is what it takes to keep the lights on and stay in business. So that's the assumption we made when we did the math here in anything that pertains to this row here. So next you have compressed margin. That's something interesting. It's something that's certainly growing a lot. We've done a lot of that with our 3PL side. It's a situation where you have a buyer with maybe one store that just has huge volume, maybe a group of stores, but it's where you have a buyer who knows what they want. They don't need sales reps calling on them, writing orders. It's more pre-planning, obviously larger drops. That's what this model is all about. When you cut out some of that extra work on behalf of sales reps and small deliveries, you could profitably run as a distributor at more of a 20% break-even margin. So that's where we're going to set the margin for these columns here. Third is what I call the ultra compressed model. You see this with the largest chain stores, the largest players. when it comes to the end retailer and restaurant, that's how a distributor is going to run it. This margin will range anywhere between 10 and 17%. The going rate right now in most markets is going to be 10%. It gets tricky if you have markets in your network like Oregon, where everything has to be direct store delivery and you can't make large drops to central warehouses. But for the sake of this analysis, we're going to run this ultra compressed distribution model at 10% margin. Okay, so last on our padlock of channels here is the retail model. We're going to keep things really simple here. I know that there are a lot of variations that we could play with, but we'd end up having hundreds of columns, and you don't want to listen to me talk for 2 hours. So we're going to go with conventional retail is one model. That's what you think it is. It's 30% margin. Yes, of course, there are people that are trying to go higher than that. There are people that are going to go lower than that, but through all of these combinations where conventional is in play, we're going to assume a 30% retail margin. The second that we'll use in this analysis is the wholesale club. The obvious wholesale club that we all know in the wine world's Costco. The public margin there is very, very public, that it's 13, 14%. We go with 13% in this analysis. And you'll see some different options as we go through this through that channel. So going down, let's pick a wine. Let's go with Sancerre Blanc. That's a good one. About €7.40 on average. We were buying Sancerre for less than that. We're buying Sancerre for more than that. It really depends. But let's pretend AC Sancerre. Let's go through scenarios there. So €7.40 converted at 15% exchange rate, $8.51 in US dollars ex works. You add on $1.17 freight and tax, which is a little bit conservative, but it's realistic. And let's look at what we get through these different scenarios. So first off, we have our indirect model. That's what we spoke about earlier. This model assumes that we have a separate importer, then a distributor, and then a retailer, all three of which are taking 30% margins. When that goes down, the wholesaler right off the bat is going to be at 1975, and that's where we see a lot of the known Sancerre names, the big names for talking about basic AC Sancerre. They'll be around 1975. In a pre-tariff world, they'd come in just under $30 on the retail shelves. So if those were to go through a 25% tariff, wholesale bumps up to kind of a sketchy $23.40, and you're going to be well over $30 retail. Most people have held off. Most people in this world, most of these importers that are in this indirect model, and then distributors that are involved in that, they know that this area here would be a problem. So far prices have held, but that's obviously not sustainable. And you'll see movement there in time, because most Sancerre is going to clock in under 14%, and regardless, probably everything will be tariffed at 25%. Minimum soon anyway. So that's what you could expect to see, unless there's some crunching down on margins in all channels, which you might see a little bit of that, probably not that likely. So 100% tariff, what happens there? That's what's threatened. With this indirect model, 3-tier, you'd be at $36.43 as a distributor, and an insane $52.04 retail. I don't see any chance that would ever work, which means that if we saw 100% tariffs or anything close, most of these people in the indirect game from the importer side, these importers would probably just close up shop. It's just it wouldn't work. Some of them would probably be smart and modify their business and try to create a more compressed model, but I think for a lot of importers that's difficult, because they don't have any real infrastructure in which to operate and deliver the goods. So it's a bit tricky. Next, let's look at what's been going on in urban markets forever, which is this direct model. Generally, most of the big names with these European wines will be involved in this indirect model, because they're big names. They end up with a big name importer and national distribution. But more of the mom and pop type wineries, certainly is the case in Sancerre, almost more than any other region, they'll roll with this direct model in all major markets, where a distributor buys it direct. They'll take a 5% margin for their import side and the 30% margin for distribution. So 35% margin overall would get them to the high 14s as a wholesale price, and it could retail out. You could retail AC Sancerre in the low 20s. That's pretty good. Now, remember, all these guys who are, going 3-tier, and a lot of these same distributors who are self-importing also have 3-tier distribution Sancerre. They know that they could probably get a little more than $14.89 for Sancerre Blanc at this point. So most people have been pricing their Sancerre a little higher than that and taking some extra margin. 15.50, 16, even 17.50 on something that costs €740. That's common. Those prices would put you in the mid-20s, which is probably okay. So tariffs came along, and I know that we've been affected by this already. We've had a lot of Sancerre that's landed since these tariffs, and that'll put us at just normal margins with a direct model. That puts us at around $17.50, which translates to about a $25 retail, which, that's still okay. If you compare it to what was going on, what's going on pre-tariff in, the traditional 3-tier model, it's still better. You wouldn't have a chance of that extra margin that you could have kind of squeaked out on a DI model in the old days, but it's okay. Now, when you get to 100%, it gets terrible. You'd be at 27 and change wholesale, $40 on the shelf. That's not going to fly for AC Sancerre. Maybe for some single vineyard stuff, some awesome single vineyard stuff, Montdomnay, something like that. But that's not what we're talking about, so it won't work. Things would be pretty stuck there. Okay, so let's say we go to compressed margin. That's where it gets, I think, more interesting. Again, this is a 20% margin on behalf of the distributor, and they're buying direct. So you have some real nice compression through the supply chain so far. You still have a retailer that might want to go at 30%, go standard on margin. If they did, they'd have a rockin' deal. They'd be selling Sancerre for $16.99. We see people do that. They sell huge volume. They can buy hundreds of cases at once and blow it out the door. Now, most people that are brick and mortar, that's more of an online thing. If you're brick and mortar and you're going with you're buying from a compressed distribution model partner, you're probably going to bump that up to $19.99. You're going to make your 47-48% margin. Make the board happy. Everybody smiles. That was pre-tariff. In a tariff era, it gets a little tighter. With this model, you'd buy it. A retailer would buy from distributor at $14.75. They could squeeze out a $21 retail if they wanted at 30%. They'd probably round it up, make some money, and go to $25. The guys that are selling Sancerre online, they might skip it or go even leaner and get to $19.99. You get to 100%, it gets a little grim. You'd be at 22. High 22s, top in 30, retail at 30%. Again, most of these guys want to make more than 30%. That's a problem. Probably not going to work. So let's go down to two more scenarios here. Wholesale clubs. So most wholesale clubs are going to buy on, at minimum, a compressed model, because by definition, you don't have individual reps calling on these wholesale clubs, writing orders, doing all that. Deliveries are big. So they'd be at, say, they'd buy at $11.68. They could sell at $13.50. Most Sancerre wholesale clubs would be, in the pre-tariff days, $13.99. It still is. Anybody that has these contracts for, a contract for Sancerre at a wholesale club, that's a high volume contract. You're gonna try to hold pricing. So, we've done so, for example, rather than going up to, say, $14.33 with a 25% tariff, we've kind of squinted, and we're carrying on. Most people are, I think, through the end of the year at, or this area here in the mid 11s. But come next year, if 25% becomes the permanent reality, wholesale clubs would be buying at $14.50, selling in the high 16s. Most of them would probably wait a while. Most of those buyers would probably wait a while until, lower price pre-tariff stock clears through broad market, so they could look good. So you might see a gap there. You get to 100% tariff, even for a wholesale club with compressed margin, distribution is pretty rough. They'd be buying at 22, selling at 26. I don't think many of those buyers would say yes to that proposition, which brings us to ultra compressed margin. Probably the only way that any of this would work at 100%, whether you're talking Sancerre or any other category, to where you could see European wines retailing at, any type of a reasonable price, would be the combination of an ultra compressed distributor margin with direct importation at a wholesale club, 13% margin. What does that look like? $11.38 wholesale cost before tariffs, before all this, for $12.99 retail. You see that. But in a tariff era, you'd be looking at high 13s, about a $16 retail if it was a 25% tariff. And then, you go to 100. It seems kind of crazy. They'd buy at 21. and they'd sell at $24.50. But if we remember, if we go back all the way to a 3-tier model, a much less efficient model with, a traditional retailer at 30% margin, you're looking at 28.21. So even with 100% tariff, if things are really, really compressed along the supply chain, pricing could be better. But the big question that I have is, would a wholesale club buyer who's used to, retailing Sancerre at, $12.99 or anything that they're buying volume of, are they going to say yes to Sancerre at $21.40 for 25? I don't know. That's going to be interesting to see. Hopefully we don't have to even worry about that and we won't see 100% tariffs. But that's kind of a quick overview for you. There are many other factors here that you could look at. One that comes to my mind right now is, how would somebody treat margin as an importer when they're paying tariff? Could someone get away with taking the tariff portion of the laid-in costs out of the markup equation and put those in a separate bucket as far as accounting goes, and only run your margin on what's not related to tariff, on your ex works cost and your freight and your other taxes? I don't know. That would be interesting. That would bring all these prices down a bit. Probably wouldn't help a ton, but that would help. I'm not an accountant. I'm not sure what would happen there in our company or within other companies. Another thing to look at is discounts on the producer side. We're going to see a downward spiral in prices for European wine with what's going on with Brexit, what's going on in China, and then with all this tariff activity in the U.S. How far will those go? They will go down. You also had low yields in 2019 in much of France, though, much of Europe. So that would kind of thwart some of that pressure to put prices down. But in the long run, I think prices will come down with all this. So I don't know. It's definitely a dodgy scenario any way you look at it, but kind of interesting. Hope this was useful for you guys to just take a look at. I'll clean this up a bit and post a link that you can mess with in the comments section of this video here in the next couple of days. If you like this sort of stuff, we're going to do more of this year as the market gets more and more interesting. So if you like it, hit subscribe and you'll probably see more of these in the next month or two. Thanks for watching and talk soon.